Welcome back, everyone. I'm so happy you are here again. Before we start, please comment down below where you are listening from and what time it is currently. And if you want to support me, please like the video and subscribe. Thanks. Let's start. The cuffs click before he says a word. A young man in a Red Sox cap stares past the hallway lights, jaw locked, medical student ID still warm in his wallet. In his car, zip ties, a gun, gloves, a sock full of bullets. On a laptop, a trail of emails and map routes. Boston's Craigslist massage robberies had already turned violent. Fear was spreading room to room. He was engaged, with a spotless future, a wedding binder waiting at home. But here, the mask slipped. To see how it cracked, we need to go back to the first knock on the door. The hallway camera sees him first, tall, baseball cap low, a neutral walk that gives away nothing. It's April 2009 in Boston, and people are meeting strangers through ads that turn rooms into private storefronts. The danger hides in the convenience. The door closes. The outside world falls away. Two people, a phone number, a rate, and trust that lasts exactly as long as the lock holds. Julissa Brisman had set an appointment at a hotel near the city's humming backbone of bars and offices. She knew the routine: confirm the time, answer the knock, keep the meeting short. The elevator arrives with its soft chime, the camera taking those in different frames. Cap, jacket, hands empty. He glances once at his reflection in the metal doors. Then he disappears down the hall, turns right, and steps out of view. Inside, the first seconds matter. A greeting, a name, an exchange that signals normal. But his script is different. Control first. The room becomes a chessboard where he's already moved the pieces. A voice drops into commands, a hand reaches, and the gun appears, its weight deciding terms before words can. Zip ties, duct tape, a method that's efficient and practiced. He tries to pin the moment in place like a specimen. What nobody knows yet is that this isn't the beginning. An earlier incident at another Boston hotel had already set off quiet alarms, an attempted robbery with the same cold rhythm. A burner email, a quick knock, a gun meant for control, but this time, resistance meets him head-on. Julissa fights, the plan that relies on silent splinters. His mask of calm slips, replaced by speed and anger. In seconds, the room detonates into sound, struggle, a sharp crack, then another. A 911 call collides with reality. Lives end faster than help can rise in an elevator. The hallway camera captures his exit. Same cap, same stride. A slight change in the shoulders, like he's carrying an invisible weight. He passes a housekeeper's cart without looking up. The elevator doors close over his reflection again. Downstairs, the lobby is normal. People scrolling phones, a clerk printing a receipt. The usual hum that hides what just happened 6 floors up. Forensics starts where the adrenaline stops. Detectives move in with gloves and flashlights, pulling stories from silent objects. Shell casings on the carpet. A fragment of a latex glove near the bathroom. Shoe prints faint in the pile, measured, photographed, compared against tread patterns. The duct tape holds prints in smudged patches, partial but not useless. Every small piece gets bagged because any small piece can turn a ghost into a name. Meanwhile, word spreads. The local news pushes the alert, and the phrase Craigslist hitchhikes on the fear. The platform that promised private convenience now carries an echo of risk. Women working alone in hotels start texting each other names, caps, habits to watch for. A city that sells anonymity starts to understand the cost of it. In the police bullpen, the incident board grows. The earlier Westin case goes up beside this one. Times are matched against hotel key logs and camera clocks. Elevator footage is charted into a route. Entrance, hall, door, exit. A pattern begins to form. He uses the cap like a shield, the jacket like a uniform, the same dark bag at his side. He reaches for control early, speaks in a steady, stripped-down tone, and leaves quickly. The killer wants the world to stay neat. Violence is the mess he creates only when the script breaks. Detectives know they need more than images and partials. They need a path, so they start where he started, the ad. Subpoenas go out to trace the emails that booked the meeting. Headers are peeled open to reveal IP addresses, the digital equivalent of footprints in a hallway. Hotel Wi-Fi points to places where the trail blurs, but one location, if they can find it, will be home soil, a fixed network where a ghost takes off the mask. Back in the hotel room, a silent detail waits for its later meaning. The latex glove fragment, the adhesive fibers, the angle of a bullet hole that says he fired at close range. It's not just what he brought in, it's what he took from the room when he left. A false sense that distance and disguise could keep him clean. The case file begins with the knock. The hunt begins with the trace. 3 days earlier, the elevator camera at the Westin caught the same cap, the same easy stride. The stakes were lower, only because the outcome didn't end in death. For the woman in that room, they were as high as they get. A stranger at the door, cash on the table, and a job that depended on reading risk in seconds. She'd posted an ad offering exotic services. He answered with a crisp, scripted email. The time was set. The room was chosen. He arrived on schedule, like a man keeping a professional appointment. He opened with politeness. That was part of the routine. Establish normal, step inside, close the door. Then the voice hardened. The gun came out early, muzzle pointed at her chest like a period at the end of a sentence. Zip ties slid from his pocket. White plastic spelling out control. He told her to turn around, to put her hands behind her back. The duct tape came next. Mouth, wrists, ankles. A fast, efficient wrapping that turned a person into an object. He moved with a practiced rhythm, like he'd watched the scene play out in his head a dozen times. She stayed alive by complying. She watched his eyes instead of the gun. She listened for slips in his instructions. He searched the room with methodical calm. Purse, drawer, bathroom, beneath the mattress. Like he already knew where people hid things. He kept his voice low, not to scare her, but to keep the hallway silent. He didn't linger. He wasn't looking for conversation or cruelty. He wanted money and control, and he wanted both fast. There was one wrinkle. He didn't notice the corner of tape that didn't adhere flush to skin. Later, it would hold the edge of a fingerprint, a partial swirl that meant he was mortal. He also didn't see how the camera outside his door framed his path perfectly. Elevator, turn, door, and back. The hotel's sensor logs recorded the time the elevator stopped on her floor. The guest Wi-Fi recorded a device connecting near that minute. Individually, these were smudges. Together, they were a silhouette. When he left, she waited for the thump of the closing door and the sound of his steps swallowing distance. Then she worked her lips against the tape, bit, tugged, and peeled enough to draw breath. She inched her wrists against the bite of plastic until she found purchase and friction burned the ties enough to slip. She called the front desk first, then the police. The words were jagged but clear. A man, a gun, zip ties, a baseball cap. She gave details. His height, his voice, the clean, clinical way he moved. It was terror translated into data. Detectives arrived expecting a messy account. What they found was a method. He spoke in short orders. He kept the gun close, but didn't wave it. He wore gloves for most of the time, but not all. The tape gave them partials. The plastic zip ties hinted at a brand sold widely, but traceable by batch. Fibers from the tape clung to the carpet. The room had a faint smell of latex. He'd thought about evidence, but only in broad strokes. The details, temperature, humidity, the way adhesive captures residue, were beyond his control. Meanwhile, the hotel handed over hours of footage. The composite sketch began with her description and tightened with camera frames. The investigators traced his route from the building entrance to the elevator and out again. They didn't know his name, but they now knew his windows. Arrivals, exits, the minutes he liked to work. A profile started to breathe. Early evening meetings, mid-market hotels, women alone, simple ads with clear rates. He made contact via disposable emails and set the tone with confidence. He avoided cash machines near the scene but hit ATMs earlier in the day. The case file for the Westin incident didn't just survive. It taught. It narrowed the timeline. It suggested he rehearsed. It hinted at his need for order and speed. And it left one tiny digital breadcrumb that would undo everything. The email header he thought was scrubbed. Subpoenas would pry open that layer soon enough. For now, the Westin board sat beside Julisa's. 2 crimes connected by cap, cadence, and control. The pattern wasn't speculation anymore. It was a map. And it pointed forward. The thing about Craigslist in 2009 was the myth. People thought throwaway emails and hotel Wi-Fi made you invisible. Detectives knew better. Anonymity online is a mask with seams. You tug in the right places. It comes off. They started with the obvious. The ads, the replies, the timestamps that bracketed 2 rooms and 1 method. Then, they reached for legal tools. Subpoenas went out to Craigslist to unlock the headers behind simple messages that looked like they were wiped clean. They weren't. Headers are like the postmarks of the internet. They carry routing scars. When the returns landed, the first look didn't give a name. It gave numbers, IP addresses that mapped to networks, not people. Still, numbers talk. A cluster pointed to hotel Wi-Fi near the Westin at the window of the attempted robbery. Another hit aligned with the night Julissa died. That made sense. He worked on site. But one datum stood out like a nail in a clean board. A repeat IP that belonged to a home network in the Boston area, used hours before a meeting to send a confirming note. Meanwhile, detectives sat with hotel IT managers who were used to logging lost devices, not hunting killers. They pulled connection logs by MAC address. A single device signature blinked on and off across 2 hotels within days, always in the evening, always for under an hour. Each time it appeared, a woman had received a message from the same email alias. Polite, brief, professional in tone. The alias looked random, but the reuse told a story. He liked control, but he also liked convenience. He didn't reinvent every wheel. They followed the email. The provider was asked for session data, login times, originating IPs, recovery methods. The account didn't list a real name, but it did list timestamps that overlapped with the hotel windows. Then came the slip that matters in most cyber cases. One login from a place that wasn't a hotel, wasn't a cafe, wasn't a library. It resolved to a subscriber line registered to an apartment in Quincy. Another login pinged from a campus block assigned to a medical school. That was the first real fork in the road. A home line and a campus IP meant a person with a life that had paperwork. Detectives cross-checked the building's tenant list with students enrolled at the medical school using public records and administrative directories. One name overlapped cleanly across both worlds. It wasn't proof. It was a thread. Pull it carefully, or it snaps. While that tug happened, a second track moved forward. The devices. The MAC address seen on hotel Wi-Fi could belong to a laptop or a smartphone. The alias had accessed map sites and hotel pages minutes before meetings, according to cached artifacts the provider could see at the network edge. That behavior pattern, maps to specific hotels, then mail, gave them a cadence they could model. They ran the sequence against citywide hotel Wi-Fi logs volunteered by cooperating properties. A half-dozen hits rolled in. Each hit landed in the same hour bands, near the same floors where security had recorded a man in a cap, moving like he belonged. The digital picture was starting to look like the hallway silhouette, blurry until you overlay frames. They added financial data under warrant. An ATM camera showed a man in a Red Sox cap withdrawing cash earlier on the day of Julissa's murder. The timestamp slotted neatly between a home IP login to the alias and a later hotel Wi-Fi connection. It wasn't just where, it was when. The rhythm of his planning had a beat. Then came a computer. Not his, at least not yet, but a computer at the medical school library that kept session logs for security. On the night of the Westin attempt, the alias account had a login from a workstation there. The school provided a seat map. The station had a camera. It took frames every few minutes for loss prevention. In one, a tall man sat forward, face obscured by a cap, but the jacket matched the elevator footage. It wasn't facial ID. It was outfit continuity. They still needed the device that carried his habits. The campus IP and the home network gave them probable cause to look closer at one student whose address and class schedule lined up. Quietly, they pulled plate readers on the route between Quincy and the hotels. A car appeared in the windows that mattered. Meanwhile, the alias's drafts folder, accessible under warrant, held unsent messages with meeting details and rates, along with a set of saved searches for massage and exotic in Boston. The drafts had metadata, creation times, last edits, geo-hints from the browser that tagged approximate location. Twice, those geotags placed the device near the student's building. What nobody in the bullpen said out loud yet was the name. They said, our subject. They said, the Quincy address. They didn't want to spook him by moving too soon. But the pattern was closing, loop by digital loop. The myth of throwaway identity had become a rope, and the rope was tightening around a life that, on paper, looked flawless. On paper, he fit the clean lines. Second-year medical student, white coat days, anatomy labs that smelled like antiseptic and determination. He paired flashcards with wedding planning, alternating between vascular pathways and venue availability. Friends saw a tall guy who kept his schedule tight, who logged long library hours and texted his fiancée goodnight photos of textbooks splayed open like proof of effort. The calendar on his wall split into two tracks, exams and a date circled in a careful hand. He looked like forward motion. Underneath that clean draft, pressure gathered. Tuition bills stacked in silent piles. Gambling offered an outlet that felt like control, at least at first. Blackjack was simple math with adrenaline. Small losses became larger ones, soothed by the idea that a smart mind could solve variance. Weeknights bled into casino, floors lit like midday. He learned the hum of slot banks, the quiet language of chip sliding, the small lies you tell yourself about the next hand. Each trip needed cash. Each cash run had to stay off the books. Meanwhile, his relationship felt like a plan carried out on time. Registries were chosen, a guest list argued over, and then agreed upon. There were photos of beach vacations and polite dinners with parents where he played the role well, attentive, tidy, ambitious. He picked a suit, tried on rings, held a binder thick with receipts and swatches. He wrapped his future in rituals, as if neatness guaranteed safety. He told his fiancée he was studying late. He told himself that was mostly true. Between those layers, a third life grew, quiet and nocturnal. After midnight, when the building settled and the campus went to sleep, he moved through forums and classifieds with the same tidy method he used for his coursework. He refined searches to filter the noise. He built scripts for outreach that sounded professional and calm. He learned which hotels asked fewer questions, which floors had blind spots between cameras, which corridors let you approach a room without crossing too many lenses. He favored a uniform, cap, jacket, bag, one that made yesterday and today blur together. Compartmentalization wasn't a trick, it was a habit. He kept his browser in private mode and cleared histories, but he also saved drafts like backups. He paid in cash at the cage after hitting ATMs under different street cameras than the ones that watched him enter hotels. He wore gloves for the messy minutes, then pocketed them neatly. He watched himself in reflective surfaces, the elevator door, a darkened window, practicing the expression that made strangers glance past him. He built silos in his mind, medicine here, marriage here, money here, risk in the gap between. He rationalized with small steps. The first time he wrote to an ad, he told himself he was only looking. The first door he knocked on, he told himself it wasn't violence, just a transaction controlled by fear. After the Westin, he convinced himself he hadn't crossed a line because no one died. He believed in his own restraint, in a theory that his intelligence would keep the chaos inside boundaries he set. The need for order walked beside the need for domination, like two parts of the same stride. He wore his day self-convincingly. In labs, he volunteered to lead dissections and kept his tools aligned at right angles. He quizzed classmates kindly and logged case reports with precise notes. Professors saw competency. Classmates saw a steady partner for study groups who answered messages quickly and smiled in the short, contained way of someone already promised to a life. He spoke about the wedding with easy warmth. Venue, playlists, seating, never once letting the predator's cadence leak into those conversations. At home, he staged normalcy. Groceries lined up by expiration date, shirts hung in color gradients, textbooks stacked by subject. The wedding binder sat on the coffee table like a shrine to the future, while a hollowed book hid ammunition on a different shelf. The gun lived where guests wouldn't look. He kept zip ties in a drawer that also held extra HDMI cables and batteries, as if anonymity could be achieved by proximity to ordinary objects. He built a still life of a good man's apartment. Gambling debt kept its own clock. Losses demanded replenishment at a pace exams couldn't match. Each time he crossed the threshold into a hotel room with a stranger, he told himself it was about balance. Make back what he lost, close the loop, go home to the life that waited. But the pattern pulled him forward. The emails got cleaner, the meetings got faster, the rituals hardened into ritualized control. Door, command, restraints, search. He shaved seconds where he could, believing speed was safety. He wasn't a loner. He maintained text threads, made plans, showed up. His fiancée met him after class, and they walked the familiar campus paths, talking about centerpieces and guest accommodations. He posed for photos, cap off, hair neat, shoulders relaxed. He looked like a man with nothing to hide. He rehearsed that look until it needed no rehearsal. The dissonance didn't ring loud, it hummed underneath. In the car, Between the ATM and the next hotel, he drove with the radio low, eyes on the lanes, making small adjustments with surgeon's hands. He liked the quiet of those minutes, the sense that his life could be arranged into compartments forever if he kept the edges sealed. He believed he could be both people indefinitely, the healer and the hunter, because he edited the story he told himself with the same care he edited his emails. What he didn't account for was friction. Digital traces rub between compartments, heat builds, and seams come apart. He sat in the back seat without shifting, wrists behind him, the cuffs, a tight grammar that ended sentences. The arrest team kept their voices clipped and neutral. He asked if he needed a lawyer. They said he would have a chance to call one downtown. The Red Sox cap lay on the seat beside him, not on his head. Small detail, but it changed the way his face read. More angular, less anonymous. He looked past the window, eyes fixed on a point that did not exist outside the glass. Upstairs in Quincy, the knock was not a knock. It was a loud announcement and a key in the lock under a signed warrant. His fiancée opened the door fast, face flushed with confusion. She saw badges before she saw guns, and the question came instinctively. What is going on? The reply was procedural and kind at once. We have a search warrant. We will explain as we go. Please step aside. The apartment smelled like coffee and printer ink. On the table, the wedding binder waited open, vendor notes circled in soft pencil. The living room was neatly staged, as if a catalogue had visited and never left. Officers moved through it, in a flow that looked casual, but was not. One went to the bedroom, another to the kitchen, a third to a small office corner set against a window. The lead investigator kept a running narration for the fiancée, each sentence designed to keep panic from outpacing understanding. We will photograph before we touch. We will log everything. You can watch, but please do not step into the rooms we are processing. The first hits were small but loud in their implication. In a desk drawer, a roll of duct tape, the same brand and width noted in case reports. In a bin beneath the bed, a Ziploc bag of zip ties, identical to those collected from 2 hotel rooms. In the closet, a jacket whose stitching matched the seam that appeared in multiple camera frames. Items alone prove little. Together, they start speaking. Each object got its own bag, its own label, its own place in a chain of custody that would matter later. They found the gun after a careful sweep. It was not in a nightstand. It was nested inside a hollowed-out hardcover on the shelf, pages carved into a rectangle with clean, squared edges. The handgun sat in that cavity with 2 spare magazines, oiled and quiet. A second officer opened another book and found ammunition stacked in a sock, the same arrangement detectives had seen in his car. Photographs clicked, the scene frozen before hands moved. The weapon made the search feel different. It turned the apartment from a home into a staging area. In the office corner, a laptop waited closed, charger coiled neatly, a mouse aligned parallel to the pad. A sticky note listed lab schedules and wedding deposits, the 2 lives sharing a square of yellow. The digital forensics team arrived with anti-static bags and a practiced tempo. They shot the screen lid, the ports, the stickers on the underside. They powered down from the outlet, not the button, to preserve volatile memory. A second device appeared, a small external drive tucked behind textbooks. Both went into evidence, sealed with tape that would be signed across the seam. On the kitchen counter, a stack of receipts, casino withdrawals, ATM slips, dates that shadowed the case timeline. Next to them, a grocery list in his fiancée's handwriting. The investigators catalogued each slip, each timestamp. Paper is the analog of a browser history. It tells on you gently. In a junk drawer, gloves, nitrile, blue, a half-empty box. The latex scent from hotel scenes echoed in that small, domestic space. The fiancée tried to square the 2 scenes in front of her, officers handling her plates with gloves, while others photographed a gun from a book. She asked for his location. She asked if she could call his parents. She asked if there had been a mistake. The lead investigator explained, as far as the warrant allowed. An ongoing investigation, serious allegations, items consistent with that investigation found here. She cried without drama, quiet and steady, as if the body knew before the mind agreed. Downstairs, he was booked. His pocket surrendered a wallet with a medical student ID, a few crumpled bills, and a folded printout of a hotel confirmation that matched a prior scene's date. He kept his face locked in that same forward stare. When asked to remove his shirt for photographs, he complied, revealing a faint abrasion on his wrist that could read as nothing or as the ghost of a fight. They swabbed his hands, rolled his prints carefully, and logged his belongings into bins that said property, not possessions. Back at the apartment, the search closed loops. A baseball cap, red, worn at the brim where fingers might adjust the fit under cameras. A dark bag with tape residue clinging to the inner lining. A receipt for a prepaid phone purchased days earlier. An email printout that looked like a draft, never sent, but saved, with a rate and a room number blank. The laptop, when previewed at the scene under protocol, showed cached map routes to hotels, searches for local massage listings, and a browser history in private mode that was not as private as he believed. They left the apartment as they found it, minus what the warrant allowed them to take. The wedding binder stayed. The books returned to shelves with gaps that meant more than the titles ever did. The fiancée stood in the doorway and watched the line of evidence bags move past like a quiet parade. By evening, the charges were filed. Bail was denied. The headline wrote itself, and then wrote him. The Craigslist killer. He had not confessed. He did not need to. The apartment spoke in the language of objects, and the translation was blunt. In the district attorney's war room, the case lived on walls. Red string is a cliché. This was cleaner. A grid of dates, hotel names, camera stills, and IP logs aligned to the minute. The goal was not volume. It was coherence. Jurors do not convict on noise. They convict on rhythm. The prosecutor walked the board like a conductor, tapping beats. Arrival, Wi-Fi login, knock, exit, ATM. Each node had a source, subpoena, warrant, chain of custody tag. Nothing floated, everything landed. The timeline came first. On one column, the Westin attempt, the alias email confirming time, a hotel Wi-Fi session within minutes of the knock, elevator footage of the cap entering at 6:21 and exiting at 6:31. On another, Jalissa's murder, a home IP login to the alias in the afternoon, an ATM withdrawal at 5:12 captured on camera, the Quincy to downtown plate read hits at 5:30, a hotel Wi-Fi handshake at 6:02, then the elevator stills, then the frantic 911, then the exit at 6:14. The prosecutor could point and say, "This is choreography." Forensics refused to be background. Ballistics matched the handgun from his hollowed book to the shell casings recovered in Julissa's room. Unique striations, the tool mark signature that firearms examiners treat like a fingerprint. Tape fibers from the Westin, aligned with the duct tape roll in his desk. Brand, width, adhesive composition traced by lab report, not guess. Zip ties from scenes lined up with ties found at his place by cut pattern and mold marks. Fingerprints were partial, but the lab called them consistent with his prints on multiple subfeatures, bridge points that say same source more likely than not. The digital spine carried weight. Emails from the alias to victims were authenticated by provider logs. Headers showed routes. Session records anchored logins to home and campus networks. Cached maps on his laptop preloaded routes to hotels at times that nested inside the incident windows. The drafts folder kept unsent messages with dates and rates, a quiet ledger of intent. Browser artifacts revealed repeated searches for terms tied to the victim's categories. Private mode did not erase the residue left in system files. The forensics team would testify to that in plain, patient language. Money told its story too. Gambling losses were not just rumor. They were statements and cage withdrawal records. The prosecutor circled, cash pulls that preceded attacks by hours. The ATM camera frame of the cap served as connective tissue between the home IP login and the hotel Wi-Fi. Financials are not motive proof on their own, but they turn fog into shape. A person needing cash moves differently than a person without pressure. The cadence was there on paper. What about motive without a confession? The strategy dodged the trap of telling jurors why he did it. The prosecutor focused on what he did, how often, how similarly, and how the objects in his life echoed the objects from the rooms. Instead of a sweeping theory of his soul, the case offered friction. When his plan met resistance, violence surfaced. The jurors would be asked to infer intent from pattern, not poetry. Witnesses were sequenced for effect. First, the surviving victim from the Westin. She would anchor the method, the voice, the orders, the ties, the tape. Then, the detectives who built the timeline, each one handling a segment, hotel logs, camera clocks, IP mapping, so no single witness had to carry everything. The The digital forensics analyst would translate the laptop's story without jargon, explaining how deleted does not mean gone. The firearms examiner would align test fire images with recovered casings. The last, if needed, would be the medical examiner, brief and clinical, grounding Julisa's final minutes in facts, not spectacle. The prosecutor rehearsed the story with the 30-second rule in mind, chopping out anything that felt like lecture. Each 30 seconds needed a beat, a still frame, a timestamp, a quote from a log, a photo of an object bagged. They kept micro-moments as anchors, the cap brim worn where fingers pinch, the hollowed book squared cut, the wedding binder open while evidence bags filled the hall. Jurors remember human texture, even in data-heavy cases. Defense options shrank as coherence tightened. Suppress the laptop? The warrant packet was clean, probable cause layered from IP to campus login to plate reads. Attack the ballistics. The lab notes were meticulous, the chain of custody unbroken, the extraction and test firing documented with photos and timestamps. Claim misidentification? The pattern-tied outfit continuity, travel arcs, and the cap frame at the ATM to a device trail that did not care what he wore. Suggest third-party access to Wi-Fi? The home IP logins paired with campus sessions at his medical school and the device Mac seen on hotel networks reduced that avenue to speculation. There was risk. Jurors sometimes choke on tech, so the district attorney's team built analog bridges. IP headers are postmarks. MAC addresses are license plates for devices. Cached maps are the smudges on a paper atlas you look at a lot. Tool marks on a casing are grooves like the ridges on a key. Duct tape adhesive is a chemical recipe. Brands bake different cakes. They practiced these lines until they sounded like conversation, not class. He had offered no confession. He did not need to. The case was not about a single moment. It was a braid, timeline, plus objects, plus digital trail, plus financial pattern. The prosecutor would end opening statements by stepping back from the board and letting jurors see the picture that emerges when you stop looking at dots and start looking at lines. The argument was simple. Order can be proof. And his order, the one he trusted, would be the thing that spoke loudest. Jail strips away props. No cap, no car, no binder waiting open on the table, just a cinder block rhythm, count, lock, lights. He tried to keep the same neutral face he wore in elevators, but the schedule wrote itself on him. Meals at the same minute, head count twice a day, a life reduced to lines and boxes. At first, he leaned on routine. He asked for textbooks. He arranged his cell the way he had arranged his desk. Toiletries in a neat row, folded clothes by color, papers aligned square to the edge. He wrote letters to his fiancée in a voice that sounded like before, calm, rational, a little formal. He did not talk about the gun from the book, or the tape, or the zip ties. He talked about misunderstandings, about media, about a plan to prove a negative. He underlined phrases like, "We will get through this," in straight, controlled strokes. She visited once, then less. In the small booth where voices are made of static and glass, she looked at him the way people look at a map that does not match the road. He talked about exams he would miss, about deposits they might recover, about calling vendors. She listened, brows drawn, hands unconsciously moving through the motions of a cancellation. He did not say the word charges. She did. When she asked a direct question, "Why was that in our house?" he paused a beat too long. Silence is an answer. Her letter ending the engagement arrived in a white envelope with tidy penmanship. The words were careful and final. Family members stopped by with faces that tried to be neutral and failed. In those visits, he performed steadiness. "I am innocent. This will sort out." They nodded. Their eyes dropped to the small scuffs on the floor where chairs moved. When they left, he folded into the shape of the bunk and stared at the bolts that held it to the wall. Control slipped at the edges first. Sleep broke into shards. He woke at counts and stayed awake long after. He paced, heel to toe, measuring the cell like a hallway he might one day walk out of. He filed motions in his head he could not file on paper. He wrote again to his fiancée, the tone turning from assurance to persuasion to quiet pleading. He described their first apartment, their plans for a honeymoon. He kept the future alive in paragraphs, as if syntax could reverse time. Meanwhile, lawyers came and went. Strategy meetings occupied hours that would have been lectures and labs. He wanted a story that excused the pattern. They gave him options, constrained by evidence. Suppress this. Challenge that. He clung to fragments that felt like leverage. A missing minute here. A partial there. The district attorney's coherence left little room. He learned to speak in legal phrases, and then sat with the silence between them. Jail staff watched him the way professionals do, by checklists: eating, yes; social, minimal; grooming, meticulous; affect, flattening. Notes on the chart added the phrase, self-harm. Watch after a guard found a small cut that did not fit the story of movement in a tight space. He shrugged it off. He told a visiting friend the cut was from shaving. He smiled once, briefly, the same way he had smiled on campus when asked if he was free to go. The wedding date on the calendar rolled closer like a tide that did not care about walls. He marked days in his head even when they took away anything that could mark them in ink. In a moment of permission, a chaplain asked if he wanted to talk. He said he was fine. He asked for a Bible and opened it to where the paper felt thickest. He folded the corner of a page the way you save a line you want to return to and then never did. Control narrowed to tiny acts. He sorted commissary by label direction. He aligned his shoes under the bunk at 90 degrees. He shaved with strokes counted to 30. He pressed the crease of his jumpsuit with his thumbs after laundry day. These were small rituals that felt like fences. When an officer moved his cup an inch, his fingers twitched to move it back as soon as they could. The phone on the wall became the last tether. Calls got shorter. Friends shifted from support to distance. His fiancée stopped answering. He left messages that were mostly air. In one monitored conversation, he said the word sorry without adjectives. It hung there between static and the click at the end. By then, the trial date was not abstract. It was circled on calendars in offices he would never see. He stared at the vent and ran the story again. A misunderstanding, a prosecutor with a narrative, a jury that could be swayed. He told himself he could hold the line, but the line was fraying. The day that once promised vows now promised a courtroom. When the future you curated collapses, what is left is weight. And weight, alone in a cell, starts to pull. There is a morning when the countdown ends. Not with a gavel, but with a silence that does not belong in a jail. Guards move on instinct first, then on protocol. A cell door opens to stillness. Sheets braided tight. Blood pooled where blood should not be. A hidden blade, small enough to pass eyes that had looked 1,000 times before. He had spent nights rehearsing control with tiny acts. The last act was larger, final, and irreversible. On the wall, pencil marks that counted days stopped at the wedding date. In the cell, photos arranged like anchors, smiles on beaches, arms around shoulders, the version of him that friends thought was the real one. He had circled that date in his head even when paper and pens were rationed. Now the date belonged to two stories. One that never happened, one that ended in concrete and steel. Staff called the code. Medical rushed. The rhythm of compressions met the refusal of a body that had already decided. Later, when the scene was documented, officers found letters folded into perfect rectangles. Some addressed to family, one to his former fiancée. The tone was consistent with his jailhouse voice, controlled, rational, avoiding nouns that pin blame. On the bed, the blanket lay smoothed, creases straight, a last echo of the order he craved. He had written a brief message in blood, words that tried to steer meaning after he was gone. Investigators photographed it, logged it, and moved on. The state does not litigate last words. It records them. The official announcement traveled fast. Found unresponsive. Pronounced, no foul play suspected. The case that had been pacing toward a trial hit an abrupt wall. Without a defendant, there is no conviction. There is evidence. There is narrative. There is public certainty. But there is no verdict. Legally, some charges extinguish when a defendant dies pre-trial. For families, that precision reads like evasion. They were left with grief and binders instead of testimony and a sentence. Julissa's family faced a new kind of silence. No cross-examination, no admissions, no chance to hear a jury say what they already knew. The surviving victim from the Westin was spared a witness stand, but also lost the moment where her testimony would anchor the truth in a courtroom. Closure is an overused word. What they got was finality without form. A door closed, but the room behind it stayed dark. Inside the jail, reviews began. How did a person on watch obtain a blade? How did sheets become a ligature unnoticed? Cameras were checked, logs were audited, hours reconstructed frame by frame. Policies tightened in response. More checks, fewer items, different procedures for segregated housing. To the public, those changes sound like fixes. To staff, they feel like new drills layered on old ones. To families, they are a reminder that prevention is always written after an act. Outside, The label did not die with him. The Craigslist killer headline stayed glued to his name. Media packages pivoted from pre-trial arcs to retrospectives. The apartment photos ran again. The hollowed book, the gun, the cap. The internet did what it does, collapsed nuance into tags, and then stacked new stories on top of the old one. The case became shorthand for a certain kind of danger that rides inside modern convenience. On the platform side, a line moved. Craigslist restricted and then removed sections that had blurred into markets for risk. Filters changed. Moderation changed. Lawmakers pointed to the case as proof that the digital and physical worlds are not separate lanes. They merge in hallways and hotel rooms. Police departments folded cyber forensics into violent crime units as a standard, not a specialty. The tools that found him became ordinary, taught to rookies as basics, not mysteries. But policy is not the heart. The heart is the human cost. Jalissa's story deserved more than a nickname attached to a man who hid violence behind a clean life. Friends remembered her as more than a case file: laughter, work ethic, stubbornness in the face of risk that should never have been hers to manage alone. In telling this, we keep the focus where it belongs, on the lives altered by one person's appetite for control. Back in that cell, the last scene says something uncomfortable about image and pressure. He curated himself until the curation cracked. When the narrative could not hold, he chose a final edit. No trial, no sworn answers, just the trace he tried to erase, now the record that remains. And for everyone left outside those walls, the lesson is plain. Order can be a mask, but it always leaves seams. We live in a world where strangers meet through screens and then step into real rooms. That gap between a message and a door holds risk that feels abstract until it is not. Anonymity online promises freedom, but it also hides intent. The mask is not magic, it is just thin. Still, people lean on it because convenience is a strong current. You can order a ride, a meal, a room. Why not a service that sits in the grey? The lesson from this case is simple and hard. Trust is a system, not a feeling. Platforms built for classifieds, gigs, and short-term access create new hunting grounds. Hotels, rentals, rideshares, marketplaces, spaces where two people who do not know each other share a door, a seat, a moment. Most interactions are ordinary. But predators do not hunt in extraordinary places. They hunt where normal looks like cover. The posture, the cap, the calm email read as routine. That is the camouflage. The risk is not the tool. It is the assumption that the tool screens for danger. Anonymity is not absolute. Every click sheds trace. But people count on the myth because it is convenient, and because tech language can sound like fog. In this story, headers acted like postmarks, MAC addresses like device plates, hotel logs like a guest book you did not realize you had signed. Cyber forensics is not an add-on anymore. It is the backbone of violent crime work. Detectives do not just dust, they parse. The takeaway for all of us: your digital self travels with you into physical rooms. What changes when we accept that? Verification becomes a habit, not a hassle. Platforms can push identity checks that scale, photo match, device verification, background flags that do not pretend to be perfect, but raise friction against bad faith. Hotels and short-term rentals can adopt quiet protocols, front desk alerts for repeat patterns, restricted elevator access keyed to reservations, staff briefings on behavior cues. None of this eliminates risk. It shifts the balance toward visibility. For individuals, norms help. Share meeting details with a trusted contact. Use chaperone calls that start on arrival and end on exit. Control the room, chain locks engaged, door wedges, a second person nearby when possible. Keep exits clear. Build routines that assume you will need to leave quickly. People who work alone in private spaces have always carried an unfair load of vigilance. Systems should carry more of it. Until they do, strategy beats hope. Law enforcement learned too. The old silo, white-collar computer crimes on one side, violent crimes on another, does not work. The Markoff timeline stitched both together. Now, rookies learn subpoenas for providers, log correlation, device attribution. Labs explain private browsing's limits and how deletion leaves residue. Investigations move faster because the trail goes cold, slower when you know where to look. The flip side is responsibility. Agencies must protect data they gather and narrow their scope to what the warrant actually says. Precision builds trust. Policy tends to move after pain. Craigslist adjusted categories and moderation. Other platforms followed. But the center of gravity is not a single website. It is the idea that a marketplace can serve millions without robust safety rails, clear reporting tools, rapid response channels to police, and transparency about patterns matter. If a platform knows where harm clusters, it should say so. Silence reads like complicity to the people at those doors. There is a cultural piece too. We are trained to value smoothness, frictionless checkouts, one-tap bookings, instant connections. Friction can be safety. A tiny pause to verify identity, a request for a second factor, a front desk call that confirms a name. These are speed bumps that save heads, not just headaches. We should normalize them the way we normalized seatbelts, hand sanitizer in lobbies, ID checks at bars. Inconvenience is the cheapest insurance. And we should center victims in the story, not the nickname that outlived him. Julissa was not a prop in a cautionary tale. She was a person whose life held plans that never got to be lived. When platforms, hotels, and law enforcement talk about cases like this, the goal is not myth-making, it is memory aligned with change. The face behind the facade will always draw viewers. The work is making the world safer for the people who will never be on camera, standing at a door, hearing a knock, deciding how much to trust. Start with the small permissions. That is where most double lives begin. He told himself he was just browsing, just looking. Then he told himself he was just taking cash, not hurting anyone. The story he wrote for himself was tidy. Smart people manage risk. He liked that sentence. He repeated it. Compartmentalization is a skill in medicine. Hold trauma in one hand, procedure in the other. He applied it everywhere. Anatomy lab taught him to focus through discomfort. Gambling taught him to chase control when chance mocked him. The wedding planning taught him to speak fluently in future tense. Those streams never touched. By design. He built a private code. Order equals safety. The apartment looked like proof. Drawers squared, books aligned, emails composed like prescriptions, measured doses, precise timing. Even his crimes followed a checklist that read like a sterile protocol. The uniform, the toolkit, the cadence. He thought predictability would shield him. Psychology gives names to this: compartmentalization, cognitive dissonance, escalation of commitment. But in his head, it was simpler. He was a good man under pressure, who did necessary things in narrow windows. He set rules, no names, no lingering, in and out. Rules felt like ethics when you refused to look at outcomes. He curated audience-specific selves. Professors saw diligence, classmates saw steady kindness, his fiancée saw reliability, victims saw a mask of calm that turned into orders. Detectives saw a pattern that refused to be random. Each audience got its own edit. The trick worked until the edits overlapped. He believed intelligence could outrun consequence. He underestimated friction. Digital traces rubbed against habits, creating heat. The gun in the hollowed book sat next to the wedding binder in the same room. That juxtaposition was not an accident. It was the architecture of the life he built. Opposites filed under normal. Here is the quiet truth. Double lives are not split evenly. One side is staged, the other is practiced. His practiced side won every time a door closed.